Salve citizens, this is JP Harker doing another book review. This time it is I, Claudius by Robert Graves. Yet again I've been a bit of a Philistine in that I already knew the story before I read the book. I knew it from the radio series that they did with Derek Jacobi. I've subsequently seen the very famous TV show with Derek Jacobi, Brian Blessed, young Patrick Stewart, all them. But it was the radio series that got me into it, and I thought, I should read this, it looks good. And it is. I enjoyed it. I'm a bit of a Roman history geek, so I am a little bit biased, but you don't have to be a Roman history geek to enjoy it. It is still a good story. So, to give a very brief summing up, Tiberius Claudius Nero Drusus Germanicus is our protagonist, and luckily we just call him Claudius for the most part. He is the grandnephew of the Emperor Augustus, first emperor of Rome, who is quite well represented in this. He's got a lot of positive spin for him here. And Claudius is also the grandson of Livia, who is this time period's answer to Lady Macbeth and Lucretia Borgia. She's very much that type, especially in this book. But she's also a very interesting character, and I like her. But our Claudius is spared from the murders that sort of define the Julio-Claudian dynasty, largely because he's considered unthreatening. He's a stammerer, he has a very bad limp, he was very ill as a child, so he has a lot of difficulty expressing himself, and he's very, very sickly and weak-looking, and because of that, no one considers him a threat. So when other members of the imperial family are being bumped off or exiled to islands in the middle of nowhere, Claudius the idiot just gets ignored, and he sort of keeps his head down and survives. And this is all told from the perspective of his diary many, many, many years later, after he, spoiler alert, becomes Emperor Claudius. If that was a spoiler for you, you're really watching the wrong thing. Sorry if that sounded patronizing. But yes, he is very much a survivor and is pretty unapologetic about it. He sort of claims that he's a Republican at heart, but he doesn't do a great deal about it, and he frequently sacrifices his principles in order to survive. He doesn't take any glee in this. He's not Harry Flashman, where he's sort of showing off about, yeah, I was a coward and it's all lies, but it's okay because I'm alive, yay. But he's not self-pitying with the dreaded Frankenstein syndrome either, because I absolutely hated Frankenstein because it's just 200 pages of woe is me, how dreadful is life, and you just want to slap him after a little bit. So mercifully, Claudius isn't like that. He's a happy medium. He's not proud of what's brought him to where he is, but he's not so overcome with shame that it makes the reading tedious. He's writing it as a history. So let's look at cons first, because I've written down pros and cons, as I normally do. I don't like that this has a lot of modern terminology in it. That is a turn-off for me. Robert Graves, near the start, gives a slightly patronizing explanation for why, because he says, oh, people won't understand if I use words like Gaul and legate and tribune, so I'm going to simplify it for you all. So he's calling it France, and he's calling Legion officers colonels and captains and sergeants, and he's talking about Kent and Sussex in England of all places, and I don't like that. I think it takes me out of the story because I know they're modern terms, and even if you're not into Roman history in the same crazy way that I am, it's not going to ruin a book for you to see the word tribune or to see the word sort of legate and think, you can work out from context these are ranks in society or in the military. So I think it's a little patronizing that he thinks, oh, we can't trust them with that. I'll keep it simple and modern. So I didn't like that. I didn't much like the rambling tone as well. The book is told from sort of Claudius's diary, and Claudius is an historian. He says at the start, oh, I've written many books on Etruscan history and religion and stuff. So I think it's deliberate on the part of the author that it's a rambling old man talking about history, but it does get old quite fast. I don't know if it's deliberate irony that near the start he's criticizing Homer, saying, oh, I hate that he jumps back and forth and I want to get on with the story. Whereas Claudius does exactly the same thing by saying, oh, of course, this was years ago, and by the way, we were doing this at the time, and when I was this, and when this was that. And he just goes on in these very long tangents. And it may be deliberate irony, it may not be, but it got tedious after a while. I wasn't keen. But those are the only sort of major things that are wrong with it. Something that's I sort of noted under good or bad, depending on your perspective, is the lack of heroism in our protagonist. Now, you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. I think that's perfectly correct. All heroes should be flawed. All protagonists should be human and believable. I fully agree with that. But I would also say your protagonist has to be someone that you can respect. And even if they're sort of badly flawed, they should have enough redeeming features that it evens it out. And with Claudius, I found he's interesting, and what he's talking about is interesting, but I can't respect him. Because, like I say, he sacrifices his principles time and time again to survive. And it's not it's I'll survive and I'll restore the Republic, because he never does. It's that he wants to live. And yes, I know we all want to live, but it just took it away from me a little bit that this hero, or protagonist for the want of a better word, there wasn't much about him I could respect. So I wasn't keen on that, but again, it could be a deliberate thing on the part of the author. Look, here's a protagonist that you don't respect, but you're still invested in his story, that sort of thing. So that's why it's neither pro nor con. There are more pros than cons, though, happily, especially for those who really like the history. There's lots of great history and a really nice point of view of this history from sort of someone who's inside the imperial family and seeing it. It's almost like history meets soap opera, because you're seeing all of the stuff that you know from historians, and you know it's historical fact, but you're also seeing who was secretly sleeping with who, and who was undercutting who was bribing who else, and it adds a little something to it, and I liked that. Nice little detail as well was when he talks about gladiators. I'm running through these quickly, I know. I don't want long videos, or too long a video. When he talks about gladiators and sort of flies in the face of this Hollywood idea that they all killed one another, they generally didn't. Highly trained gladiators are expensive. You don't want to be sending them out to die, because you've invested a lot of time and money in training these people up and in sort of promoting their name. So for the most part, they didn't fight to the death. They tried not to even seriously injure one another, because a gladiator was too valuable a commodity to just throw away. A nice little touch as well was that they didn't tend to have sword-on-sword fights, which again you see a lot in Hollywood. It was sword on spear or sword on trident and things like that. Little details like that are things that I like in books like this. That's why I like Bernard Cornwell, because sort of the Saxon books and things, they're full of little details that make the whole thing sort of fuller, so to speak. I'm rambling now. I criticise Claudius for that. Another great pro, and I don't want to spoiler it, but there are some very good deaths. I'm not going to tell you who, obviously, but it's not just your usual stabbings and poisonings. You have things like people starving themselves to death, or being locked away to starve. And I say it's interesting in a horrible, horrible way. Another good, well, probably the last of the really important pros is I like the characters. People like Germanicus and Posthumus, they're alright, but they are slightly two-dimensional heroes. Same thing with Drusus, Claudius' father. But they're good, you can get behind them. I like Tiberius because he has a little bit more complexity to him. He's somebody who knows that he's not a particularly nice man and would like to be a nice man, but isn't. And once the good influences in his life are gone, he just slowly slides until he's a dreadful tyrant. But you still feel a sort of a pity for him, because you think you didn't want to be this man, but this is what you've become. I remember seeing George Martin saying that Stannis Baratheon is heavily based on the Tiberius from I, Claudius, and that does really show through. But more interesting than him is Livia, and I really like Livia, mainly because of how Claudius sees her. Because Claudius sort of hates and fears her for a huge amount of the book, because she's the mover and shaker behind all that's going on. Augustus rules the world, but Livia rules Augustus. And she's doing all of these underhanded murders and things, and he's terrified that he's going to be next. But he also admires her, because she does her job exceptionally well. She keeps the empire going, and when Tiberius is sort of getting worse and worse, she keeps a leash on him. And I think there's a part where he says he'd always wished for her to die, and now that she's dying, he really wishes she could keep on living, because she is control. And it's that thing of, with tyranny, you sacrifice freedom for control. And she is interesting, and her motivations are interesting. And I like her for that. I like her more than I like Claudius, anyway. It's sounding like I'm bashing this book. I'm not. I did really enjoy it, and I did like it, and I'm glad that I've read it. I just tend to go on a bit more about the things I don't like than the things I do. Sorry. I'm going to cut this off now with my overall, which is the pros outweigh the cons. It's an interesting book. There are some good layered characters. There's lots of historical goodness in there. There's lots of intrigue in there, and it's a very interesting point of view from a very unusual protagonist. I know I went on about having issues with respecting him, but it's still good writing. It's still interesting, even if you've got issues with it. So I would say this is well worth it for the history geeks, and even if you've only got a casual interest, it's worth a look at. The language is a little dated, but still well worth a look. So I'm going to flash up the cover again. I, Claudius, Robert Graves. And that'll do me for now. I shall see you again with another review. Valete, citizens.